closing ceremony of the Oklahoma COVID-19 Remembrance Project. This memorial was created to honor the Oklahoma lives lost to COVID-19 and COVID-19 related illnesses. Each cross represents a loved one lost to the virus. To date, the Center for Disease Control states that there have been 7,644 COVID and COVID-related deaths in the state. The oldest Oklahoman to pass away from the coronavirus was over 100. The youngest was below the age of 15, according to the Oklahoma State Department of Health. Toby Gregory, the creator of the memorial, will now be adding the last crosses to the field. Lori Dector-Wright will also grace us with her voice, singing a few verses from Dvorak, Going Home.
Going home, going home, I'm just going home, quiet like some still day, I'm just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. Work all done, care laid by, going to fear no more. Mother's there expecting me, Father's waiting too. Lots of folk gathered there, all the friends I knew, all the friends I knew. Nothing lost, all's gain, no more fret nor pain, no more stumbling on the way, no more longing for the day, going to roam no more. Morning star lights the way, restless dream of dawn, shadows gone, break of day, real life just begun. There's no break, there's no end, just a living on, wide awake with a smile, going on and on, going home, going home, I'm just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door, I'm just going home, going home, going home.
Thank you, Lori. This project would not have been possible without the generosity of Pastor Bill Helm and the Forest Park Christian Church. In December 2020, the church opened its doors to the memorial, offering their beautiful grounds to house the thousands of crosses you see here today. The church also granted a generous donation to the project for materials needed to build many of these crosses. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Pastor Bill Hem.
Thank you all for coming today. When the Oklahoma Remembrance Project reached out to me and asked for a donation of space that they could provide this meaningful memorial, I wanted to talk to the creator. So I called Toby and we had such a wonderful conversation because I didn't know what we were getting into here. And the motives were so pure. All he wanted to do was find a space where we could come together and mourn our loss and reflect, which spoke directly to me because I ministered to a congregation where we could not gather and mourn our loss. And I thought, absolutely, we've got space and they've got an idea, and so let's make this happen. And I applaud Toby and the Oklahoma Remembrance Project for this wonderful, meaningful display where people do just that. They come. I mean, I'm here all the time, and they come and they just walk around and reflect and mourn. And as you see it, it's a powerful reminder of what we've lost, not only as Americans, but as Oklahomans. So I'd like you to join me in a word of prayer. Holy One, minister now to us in our grief. As we continue to be reminded and ponder of the ways that we are affected by this pandemic, we know the need to gather and we know the need to reflect and to carve out a space where we can mourn, because that is where we meet you. You have been with us this entire journey, providing support and care and love, and we thank you. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Bill. The COVID Memorial has been a tremendous undertaking. This vision began with one individual, Toby Gregory, who is the creator of the project. Every cross was handcrafted by Toby and painted by our 40 volunteers. Toby has installed thousands of these crosses over the last couple months. The paint and materials were provided by generous donations through a GoFundMe page. I would like to welcome Toby to the podium to share what this experience has been like for him.
Good evening. I was asked by Abby to speak a little bit about what the memorial meant, how it came to be, people I've met while I was here. So basically, a year ago today, we lost our first Oklahoman to COVID-19. That was a wake-up call. It was here in Oklahoma. And from that point on, we saw numbers on a TV screen every day. And I found myself coming home, looking up, what's today's number? What's today's number? And over I did that. Eventually I got to thinking, that's a big number. I don't know what this is. What does it mean? How many is this for real? So I started contemplating what I could do, and I decided, let's make these crosses. Let's put them in my yard, and we'll see what happens. That was really in July, August. I started that, making them, and then by October I said, let's put them in the yard. By the end of October, there were just over 1,000, I think 1,100, somewhere in there. And I remember thinking, people would ask, what is this for? And I said, well, this is each cross is an Oklahoman death. Not every death, but I had one. Every cross did have a death behind it. And I wanted people to be able to come by and see what would happen, see how many we'd lost. We took them down in November, and April Brooks called me and said, we need to get this back out. We need to put this back out. More people need to see this. And so this happened. It grew and grew. The reason behind it somewhat changed and evolved. As I was putting things up, people would drop by and speak with me. About 3-1 talking about One was a woman who came up to me and just said, "One of those is mine, January 6th. That's all she really needed to say. We talked for a few minutes and she went on. Another day I was out here, back in the back, and this lady comes walking to me, and you could tell she was walking with purpose. And she was coming, she wanted to make sure she could give me a donation. I said, "You don't need to do that." I said, "No, I want to. I have to. Because this means so much to me, and it's helped me so much you don't know. These are the reasons to do this." Another day I was out, waiting for the sun to go down, waiting for the lights to kick on so I could look at it after dark, and I saw a man pull up in his car. He gets out, his dog gets out, and they walk down here to the crosses, and the dog just settles. We didn't talk. I didn't need to. I knew what that was all about. And so then I kind of really realized this is a memorial not of the dead, but for the living, for all the families who have been touched by this, rocked by this, and how much they needed to see this, and how much they needed to know. They're not a number on the TV screen. Their loved ones and their families that are left behind are remembered and will be remembered. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Lori Dector Wright is our next speaker. She has been a Tulsan for 12 years. She also served the community and is serving the community as City Councilor for District 7 for 9 years. I am proud to present to you Lori Dector Wright.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to Pastor Hem and the congregation at Forest Park Church. I am Lori Dector Wright, the City Councilor for District 7, in which we are holding this remembrance today and remembering each of those lives lost and the lives touched by the lives lost due to the pandemic. Behind me is an artistic display of each individual, and as an artist myself, I just really reflect upon music and art sometimes can express those very deep things that we don't have words for. And I think when you see the thousands of crosses here that have been made by hand and lovingly placed, painted by hand and placed to grab the attention of folks driving by and of those who take time to come in and stay a while, to really reflect upon the real people who have been lost because of this virus or virus-related illnesses. And, you know, it's hard to believe that just 1 year ago we were receiving the first reports. I think none of us imagined what this last year could be like. And I think a lot of us are still very much processing the collective trauma that we have all experienced and continue to recover from. So I just wanted to speak on behalf of the city of Tulsa, of my colleagues at the council, and just say that we didn't know either. And we were learning along with all of you and trying to make the best decisions for our community with every piece of information we would receive. And I just hope that the lessons we take away from this last year are we never know what someone's going through. We never know what someone's lost. And I really hope that the silver lining is that we can learn to be kind, to develop more understanding, to argue less and understand more, and just know that as we recover from the pandemic, as we get back to life post-COVID, know that the faces of your neighbors, your friends at church, your teachers, the nurses and doctors you may be interacting with, they've been traumatized. They may have lost someone. One of these crosses or more than one may be representative of someone they deeply loved and has lost. And so kindness can go a very long way. And I just hope that's what we as a community, as Tulsans, as Oklahomans, can set forth for 2021 as we remember those that have been lost and do everything that we can to make sure we've learned the lessons taught to us over the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Our next speaker is Carolyn Harpole. Carolyn has a background in mental health. Over the last year, she has worked with and offered grief counseling to families who have lost loved ones to COVID. then she experienced her own loss.
I'm very honored to be here and overwhelmed as I look over at all of these lives that have been lost. I just want to say I began my crazy ride with COVID, and it was a crazy ride, and it has been for all of us, when my youngest brother got it in March, right at the beginning, before we knew anything. And he was very ill. He did make it. It was close. One thing I discovered was that there were no resources at that time. His poor cat had been alone in their apartment for 5 days, and they couldn't get anybody to feed them. Then they couldn't get groceries. And anyway, there were a lot of resources that needed to be done. But as creative as we are, the good people that we are, organizations and began to come up with all kinds of resources. So in May, when I was asked by a nonprofit to become part of a call center talking with COVID people from all across the United States, I jumped at the chance. I thought, wow, and boy, that took me for a wild ride. It just really made me realize, well, I learned more than I wanted to know, but it made me realize the significance of the losses. I heard each and every one's story. Just like each of these crosses has a story. Each of these are individuals. Each of these were humans that lived a life and were loved. And the same is true for the people that I talked to. And the resources they needed were unbelievable. I learned things like one man from Louisiana called and he couldn't afford a funeral. And he was trying to figure out some way to transport his niece's body from Houston to Louisiana. Well, I found a way, but it was kind of crazy. I never thought I'd be looking up such things. But the most important thing that I learned during the time I took all of the calls, COVID calls from everywhere, I learned to listen. That's the most important thing when someone is grieving, is listening. Now, I also, it's difficult for the person to talk, and I think the one drawback of the call center was that it's hard to make a connection through a phone call. But if you just listen long enough, a lot of times they will open up. But it's also difficult to listen. We as a society want to fix things. It's hard for us to listen. So the two very most important things to do is to be present for people that are grieving. It's very, very important. The thing that has been a real tragedy in all of this is the lack of the ability to hug people, the lack of the ability to have funerals, the lack of the ability to have memorials. This has really hurt the process of grieving. However, again, we've gotten creative. There are a lot of Americans that are very creative and come up with ways that we can start to connect with people. One of the things I really liked with one of the co-workers at the call center was she came up with this idea when she was talking to some of these people, close your eyes and imagine me giving you a virtual hug. I was so impressed by that. Anyway, I wanted to say I have really learned a lot through this, I call it the wild ride of COVID, and then the bottom dropped out. My brother died of COVID. I had a brand new granddaughter. I called him talked to him on Wednesday. He died the next day. He didn't tell me he had COVID. And it was such a shock. And I mean, again, there was a life. There was a person that I loved very much. And even after working with all these people that have been through COVID, I had to go through that experience myself. So I'd like to say I'm really honored, and I want to thank the people who did this memorial, because this is a start to help people.
Good evening. First, I would like to thank Abby for inviting me, and Toby for creating this project. You will never know how much this means. 365 days ago, my husband, Merle Dry, stepped out of this life and into the pages of Oklahoma history as the first COVID fatality in the state. In those 365 days since March 18 of 2020, more thousands of Oklahomans have passed. We have lost so many treasures. Time would prohibit me from naming all the precious souls who have gone on ahead of us. Mothers and fathers, grandparents, husbands, wives, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, sisters, brothers, nieces, nephews, and dear, dear friends have been lost to us because of this virus. We have dealt with the most unimaginable grief one can have at the end of life, that of not being able to be with a loved one as they draw their last breath, not being able to hold their hand, not being able to draw strength from each other because of quarantine processes that were for our medical safety. Our losses have been profound, and yet we're still standing. We're battered, we're bruised, but we're still standing. I do not know how my fellow COVID survivors have chosen to deal with the pressures. Perhaps you sought solace in hobbies or in the types of activities your loved one enjoyed. Perhaps you spend hours at their grave or talk to their picture each morning. Those things are all very familiar to me. I have even begun drinking my husband's favorite drink at Chili's restaurant, even though I'm not really fond of it, unsweet blackberry iced tea. There have been many things over the course of this year which raised my spirits on those inevitable days when it all crashed down on me. A thoughtful card, a phone call from a friend, a text, an email, flowers. But I have found my greatest strength in faith anchored to the rock of ages. The psalmist David wrote it best in Psalm 61 when he said, "When my heart is overwhelmed," and haven't our hearts been overwhelmed, "lead me to the rock that is higher than I." Had I not been able to lean on the Lord, I would have long ago buckled beneath this load of grief and loss. He has been my strength time and again. In closing, I will both borrow form and slightly paraphrase the words of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. 365 days ago, this virus brought forth in Oklahoma death and impressed upon all of us that we are equal targets for its attack. Now we and the rest of the nation are engaged in a great war, testing whether we or the nation can long endure and come forth triumphant. We are met here this evening on a field of remembrance of that war. We have come to remember those souls whose lives we lost in this battle against an unseen enemy. It is altogether fitting and proper that we do so, and yet in a larger sense, we cannot adequately memorialize those we have lost. It is beyond our poor power to add or detract from the lives they lived among us. The state and the nation may little note nor long remember what we do and say here, but let them never forget the thousands of lives represented by this field of white crosses behind me. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated to continuing the work of caring for each other, loving each other, supporting each other, and doing what we can to help make sure no one else loses a loved one to COVID-19. We hereby highly resolve that these honored dead shall not be forgotten, and that our lives will honor them every day we live. May God bless and keep each of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We are inviting anyone who has lost a loved one to COVID-19 to come to the memorial in the next 2 weeks and take a cross. By April, the memorial will be removed. Toby will give the first cross, Merle Dry's cross, to Carrie.
Morning star lights the way, restless dream of dawn. Shadows gone, break of day, real life just begun. There's no break, there's no end, just a living on. Wide awake with a smile, going on and on. Going home, I'm just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. I'm just going home. Going home. Going home.
I would like to ask anyone here today who is lost. I'd like to ask anyone who has lost anyone to COVID to please stand. Thank you for your bravery here today. We will now close the event by having everyone standing come up with a cross for your loved one. Each cross is a reminder that their memory will always remain alive. Always. Thank you for coming.